Okay, we'll start with this. We now know more about who it is Melissa Oddessa is going to be fighting in that card set to go down in a few days down there in Texas. She's going to be facing unbeaten McKenna Tansley of Canada. This is, in fact, a battle of the unbeatens.
Melissa sports a professional record of 5 wins, no losses, no draws with 2 knockouts.
McKenna Tansley, who also sports a professional record of 5 wins, no losses, and no draws with 1 knockout.
There's not much between them on paper, though to the eye, Melissa Oddessa would appear to have the edge in power.
Melissa has faced the considerably better quality of competition. Melissa's a southpaw, whereas McKenna, she's an orthodox fighter. Melissa's about 5 years older than McKenna Tansley.
5 years older and a few inches longer than McKenna.
McKenna, who saw action 2 times last year, 2 times against Shelly Barnett, against Danielle Bennett. She was last in action in September of last year. In that way,
she has fought in the last 12 months. Unfortunately for Melissa, she hasn't.
Unfortunately for Melissa, it's been approximately 12 months' time since she last saw action, at least in the squared circle, at least in the boxing ring. It's my understanding that she has been fighting, but she's been fighting in the octagon, in mixed martial arts.
And she's been winning.
But mixed martial arts and boxing being very different disciplines, whatever she's been doing in the octagon, that really don't speak to what she'll have to do in the boxing ring. As far as the boxing ring, she hasn't fought in a professional boxing match since June of last year.
Well, it's the Salgado fight where she won a unanimous decision.
It's funny because both fighters saw action 2 times last year. Melissa saw action early last year in February, then she got right back in the ring in June.
Basically means it's been about a year since she fought.
What it means, she hasn't fought under the hot lights in about 12 months, and she's going to be facing unbeaten McKenna Tansley, who's more of a boxer than a puncher.
Outside fighter, jabber,
counterpuncher, stick, and mover. Not an artillery fighter, not a particularly heavy-handed fighter, educated, capable.
Though she doesn't appear to have the same mean streak that Melissa Oddessa has.
Nor the same punching power, though she is accurate, a pot shot fighter.
Yeah, she's a pot shotter, only throws 1 or 2 punches at a time, but she makes them count.
So, with a fighter like this that's being economic and efficient, they don't really want to offer you much. They're not going to stand there and trade with you. They're not going to step into their punches. They're going to move.
They're going to move and punch.
You want to be aggressive with a fighter like this, though not overly aggressive. You don't want to give the judges the appearance that you're being walked into punches, walked into shots. You've got to
catch and shoot.
Well, you definitely have to be aggressive, but you have to be responsible about it when you do it. And that's where catching and shooting comes in.
You need good legs to be able to keep up with a fighter like this, to be able to cut off the ring.
Because McKenna Tansley is the kind of fighter that stays on the move, fights on the fly for the entirety of a fight. So if you want a boxer,
if you want to cause a finesse fighting kind of fighter like McKenna Tansley to come apart at the seams, you have to apply pressure.
But you don't just go out there winging shots for the sake of winging shots. There's more ways to apply pressure than just volume punching and taking chances. A fighter like McKenna Tansley can be pressured.
Cutting off the ring is a form of applying pressure whilst being responsible.
That's cutting off the ring, not to be confused with following the opponent in a straight line, being walked into punches, walked into shots. You cut off the ring, you pin her down, and then you unload. The saving grace for Melissa Oddessa is that she's athletic.
She's got good feet and a good set of legs. She's athletic too.
And she's a southpaw. Melissa Oddessa's right-handed jab will come over the top of McKenna Tansley's orthodox jab. That could cause McKenna a lot of problems. We know how tricky those southpaws can be. And Melissa Oddessa, she's not a headhunter. She characteristically goes to the body.
If you want to take away a mobile fighter's legs, that's where you got to go, and that's what you got to do.
You have to go to the body. That will slow them down and break them down over time as the fight progresses. This is a 10-round contest, after all.
It's a 10-round fight.
I won't lie to you. This looks like a fight where if Melissa Oddessa wants that W, she's going to have to work for it, because McKenna Tansley, she's not the kind of fighter that makes herself available to her opponent. She is defensively responsible.
Melissa has to close that gap and give the judges the appearance that she's the busier fighter in the fight.
She has to keep up and keep on McKenna Tansley, doubling up on that jab as she closes the gap. Any oncoming fire, you slip and hook and dig to the body. Slow her down.
Take those legs away.
The old saying goes, you box the fighter and fight the boxer. Melissa Oddessa has to make this more of a fight than a boxing match, because McKenna Tansley, that's what she wants to do. She wants to slow things down, move around, and box.
Melissa's going to have to to bring the fight.
And because Melissa Oddessa has now inked a pact with Brian Cohen of Team Empire. Team Empire, that's Mary McGee, that's Jamie Mitchell, that's Ebony Bridges, Christina Leonardo too. Because she has inked a pact with Brian Cohen, you get the sense that on the other side of this fight, there could be some very big opportunities. It will be Melissa Oddessa that has home field advantage. For those not aware, Melissa Oddessa is based out of Texas, whereas McKenna Tansley, she's based out of Canada.
So Melissa's got home field advantage.
And you never know. She wins this fight. Maybe she makes an appearance on the DAZN platform as part of a Matchroom show the same way that many Team Empire fighters have in the past. You're talking about Mary McGee. You're talking about Christina Leonardo too, Ebony Bridges,
Jamie Mitchell, Kaylee Reese, etc., etc.
There could be some very big things in store for Melissa Oddessa should she win this fight. This is a bantamweight contest. Bantamweight, that's 118 pounds. That's where Jamie Mitchell and Ebony Bridges hold alphabet titles. This fight's set to go down on the 17th of next month, and we'll see what happens. In other news, per tweet from Michael Benson, Eddie Hearn was asked which is the bigger fight out of Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin or Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford, to which he replied, Canelo versus Triple G by an absolute mile. Spence versus Crawford is a great fight for boxing, but anyone with a brain knows the answer to that question. And, you gotta
take this with a grain of salt because Eddie Hearn is promoting one of those shows, so of course he's gonna say that.
You have to do your own independent research. Survey the metrics for all the aforementioned parties, all the aforementioned fighters, to gauge which fight involves more popular fighters. And we've already had this discussion. We've already surveyed those metrics. What I think is going on here is the people over there at the PBC, perhaps Showtime, maybe what they figure is since Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez 3 is happening on the DAZN platform as opposed to a more well-known platform like a Showtime to Americans, maybe that's why they figure they can compete that in unison with Canelo Alvarez coming right off a decision loss to Dimitri Bivol. Maybe they think that hurt his stock.
Maybe they think that hurt his marquee value.
And perhaps on that premise, they think they can compete with that fight with this fight, this Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. undisputed welterweight contest, this welterweight unification fight. Though in truth, Canelo losing to Bivol may have only amplified the marquee value of Canelo versus Golovkin 3 because now the fight has more intrigue. Now that Canelo Alvarez seems more human, he seemed all but invincible as a super middleweight.
Yep, until he lost that decision up there at light heavyweight.
Losing that decision at 175 makes this fight more intriguing. At 168. That's the look of it. And let's be honest, Canelo is more popular than Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford put together. You tack on a big-name guy like a Gennady Golovkin, and it's really not even a contest. While Showtime, as a platform, may be a platform that more Americans are familiar with, more boxing fans are familiar with Canelo Alvarez.
Yeah.
More boxing fans pay to see Canelo Alvarez's fights.
Yeah.
That's what the metrics show.
That's not an opinion or an anecdote. That's a fucking fact.
You know, it was Errol Spence Jr.'s fans that hounded Terence Crawford to face the likes of Sean Porter immediately after the Spence versus Porter fight, the Spence versus Porter unification match. It was those...
Terence Crawford's fans were clamoring for the Crawford versus Spence fight, but Errol's fans...
For some reason, they wanted Terence Crawford to fight Sean Porter first, only so that when he did, the pay-per-view underperformed. It only sold about 130,000 pay-per-view buys on ESPN+. ESPN is the biggest sports network in the country. And if all you can do with a fight like that is 130,000 buys, it's safe to say that Crawford versus Spence.
It's an excellent fight for the hardcores.
And it's not an either-or situation for me. Both Canelo versus Golovkin 3 and Crawford versus Spence will get my money.
But yeah, one fight is a lot bigger than the other.
It's not even a question. Canelo Alvarez just sold 600,000 pay-per-view buys with a little-known Russian. What do you think a Golovkin trilogy will bring in?
On a Mexican holiday, no less.
Heard some outcry for Canelo Alvarez to move off of that date, move off of that Mexican holiday, though I wonder, would these guys still be saying that if it were a PBC fighter he were fighting? Like a Jermall Charlo, like a David Benavidez. It seems to me that the only reason they want Canelo to move off of that date is so the PBC as a platform doesn't have to compete with his fight.
Well, it's because they can.
Look, all things even, in the spirit of objectivity, it's a finite matter that people regularly spend more money to see Canelo Alvarez's fights, and he generates more money fight by fight than either Errol Spence Jr. or Terence Crawford, or if you put them together.
Where's the fucking fucking lie.
Where's the lie? I'm just giving it to you straight because it's the only way I know how to give it to you. And while Eddie Hearn might be biased, while he might be partial because he just so happens to be promoting one of these shows, promoting one of these fights, he's not wrong. Canelo versus Golovkin 3 by every quantifiable metric is, in fact, a bigger fight, even if you don't think it's a better fight. In men's junior middleweight news, per tweet from Michael Benson, the WBO have now formally ordered Jermell Charlo to defend his undisputed WBA, WBC, IBF, and WBO super welterweight world titles versus mandatory challenger Tszyu next. Parties have 20 days until June 20th to agree to a deal. Then purse bids will be called. This is happening ahead of schedule.
It was Tszyu himself that said Jermell would have 4 months to make a decision.
Listen, I understand Tszyu's frustration. I understand his impatience. I do. I really do. He had to step aside in order for that undisputed rematch to take place. He was already the mandatory challenger. This didn't just happen. He's been the mandatory challenger for some time now. And ahead of Charlo versus Castaño 2, he reached a deal with the PBC that was consummated with the Terrell Gausha fight in Minneapolis. He reached a deal with them that saw him stepping aside to allow that rematch between Brian and Jermell to take place. But now, he wants his shot.
He doesn't want to wait anymore.
According to Dake Jonovan, Charlo and Castaño were already informed prior to their rematch that the winner would have 120 days to face Tszyu, the mandatory challenger in waiting. And I think what Brian Rose and Tim are doing here, they're angling for...
You know, it says they have 120 days to face Tszyu.
They've got 20 days to reach a deal before it goes to a purse bid and 120 days for the fight to happen. And if it doesn't happen within those 120 days, one can make the assumption that the title will go vacant and Jermell will be stripped. Jermell has never really seemed receptive to this Tszyu fight based on his own comments. You know, fuck Tim Kazoo this, that guy's not in my future that.
Jermell has never been receptive to this fight with Tszyu.
You know, I don't want to outright accuse Jermell, who's the most accomplished fighter and the consensus #1 junior middleweight in the world. I don't want to accuse him of ducking Tszyu, but, you know, he has never been receptive to this fight with this guy. It's never been a priority to him. So I always got the sense that should Jermell win the way I thought he would win, he would subsequently move up to the middleweight division. All the titles,
all 4,
all those alphabet titles that Jermell procured, they would go vacant. The reset button would be hit on the junior middleweight division, and a new crop of champions would emerge.
With Tszyu among them.
And I just kind of get the sense that what the Tszyu people are actually angling for here is for Jermell to vacate that title. That it may not be so much the fight thereafter, because Jermell Charlo just fought, and now he's under pressure to make another fight, to return to the ring again this year, whereas I thought that'd probably be Jermell's only fight this year, the Brian Castaño rematch, because last year, that was his only fight. He only fought once in 2021, and I figured he's probably only going to fight once in 2022.
Maybe what they want to do is squeeze that guy so he vacates that title sooner than later.
I have to be honest with you here. I'm very high on Tszyu. I've tracked his progress fight by fight. He shows a lot of elite-level qualities here and now. Shows a lot of promise. But the worst thing that could happen for Tszyu at this point, here and now, is he actually gets Jermell in the ring. I don't think he's ready for that fight.
No, I don't.
Takeshi Inoue, Terrell Gausha, those are quality scalps. Notariable scalps like the scalp of Jeff Hearn. Rest assured, Tszyu is on the right track, but fighting Jermell here and now, actually boxing him in a boxing match, Tim may be biting off more than he can chew ahead of schedule when...
No, I don't think he's ready for that fight. Not right now.
Jermell, for what it's worth, has seen a lot of different fighters with a lot of base styles. Big, strong puncher, big, strong pressure guy in Jason Rosario. Yet another pressure guy in Brian Castaño. 2 times. They're 2 fights.
A pure boxer in Tony Harrison and a boxer puncher in Erickson Lubin.
Tszyu is showing a lot of promise and a lot of elite-level qualities here and now, but he still needs more experience. There are still that many more bones that he needs to make before he's ready to fight somebody like a Jermell Charlo. And I just get the sense that what these guys are really angling for, it may not even necessarily be the fight, it's the belt. They want to put the squeeze on this guy, so they force him to vacate, because the worst thing that could happen is he actually gets Jermell in the ring.
I always figured Jermell Charlo would end up moving up in weight and this fight wouldn't happen.
Because he's already spent so much time at 154 pounds. But now with this added pressure, this deadline, who knows? Finally, in men's lightweight news, per tweet from Mike Kopinger, it's official. Ryan Garcia and Javier Fortuna have agreed to a deal for a 135-pound fight on July 16th at Crypto.com Arena in Los Angeles on DAZN. Sources tell ESPN Garcia was set to fight Fortuna last July before the star boxer withdrew to address his mental health. I have no issues with this fight, no complaints, even though I see that a lot of other people, they do. They were holding out hope.
They were waiting for Ryan Garcia to end up fighting Isaac Cruz, and I told you that fucking fight wasn't gonna happen.
I don't really know why they thought it would. Golden Boy's not going to send Ryan Garcia to Showtime, and Sean Gibbons wasn't about to send Isaac Cruz over to DAZN. So what's getting lost in translation here?
Javier Fortuna's not a bad fight, and that's not a bad fighter.
Dropped a decision to Jojo Diaz in what was a competitive fight last year. Got himself in the winner's bracket by scoring a first-round knockout of Rafael Hernandez in February of this year.
This guy's a veteran of 43 professional fights.
37 wins with 3 losses and 1 draw. 27 knockouts. 33 years old. A southpaw. An experienced one.
More experienced than Emmanuel Tagoe, a cut above a guy like a Francisco Fonseca.
But the likes of Adrian Granados, former champion, and Robert Easter. I mean, this is a guy who's been around. He's been around the block, and it's not a bad opponent choice, if I'm being honest. If everybody's issue with Ryan Garcia was that he pulled out of fights with Jorge Linares and pulled out of a fight with Javier Fortuna last year due to his mental health stuff, if that's your issue with this kid...
Well, look, he's about to fight him. What's the problem?
I don't understand. You're mad at this guy for pulling out of fights with guys like Javier Fortuna, who he pulled out on last year, but he's about to fight him this year. So what's the problem? What's the issue? I think that when the WBC made that press release, that they were calling off the purse bid for what was supposed to be the Isaac Cruz fight, I think a lot of Ryan's critics read that as Ryan is pulling out of the fight, or Ryan is the only one who has a previously scheduled fight. No, the both of them.
It has been confirmed that both fighters had prior scheduled bouts.
Both guys, both fighters, not just Ryan. That includes Isaac, but I think Ryan's biggest critics, they're seeing this through some kind of different lens to where they can't see that Isaac Cruz is guilty of the same thing Ryan is.
But because they don't like Ryan, they want to blame him for every fucking thing.
I'm not sweet on him either, but this ain't all on him.